It's for my peoples one time.
This is AJ. I'm in here with Avery and Eve.
Hey, y'all.
What's going on? As always, you can ingest our wonderful podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, and SoundCloud. If you are on iTunes, please go ahead and give us all 5 of those stars. We would really, really appreciate it. And on all the other platforms, please just subscribe. You can hit us up on social media across the intersection on Facebook, across this one on Twitter and the Grizzam. I am on Divinimous on all platforms. Feel free to holler at me.
E to the V to the on Twitter.
So yeah.
We just jumped right over Avery because you knew he was not going to give his social media.
I'm not messing with Avery.
But there might be one day where he
was
says,
staked out the Capitol when Zuckerberg was over there giving his testimony. So I ain't messing with Avery over there today.
Phantom Menace.
V for Vendetta over here. Yeah. Avery's the... So anyway, we're getting back in the normal cast of characters. We thank y'all for rocking with us this week. We had a special guest last week because Avery wasn't here. What's going on, man? So how you been? You ain't been with us the last couple of weeks. Everything good?
Yeah. You know, everything is, man. Just really trying to be obedient, man. I just finished reading this book, The Richest Man in Babylon.
Ooh, I need to read that again.
George S. Clacy. Yeah, absolutely.
About giving, the power of giving.
No, that's not it. It is about money, though.
Yeah.
It is about...
Have you read that book too?
Yeah, I did, but it was a few years ago.
Yeah, I read it when I was a teenager. Then I gave it away in my 20s to another teenager, and then I decided to read it again. Mm-hmm. But mostly it is about money management, and by using allegories based out of ancient Babylonia or Mesopotamia. Babylonia, for those who don't know, is West Asia, or what we now will call
the Middle East.
Yeah, the Middle East. Yes.
Yeah, Middle East is a created region.
Right, because what is it middle of? What is it east of?
Well, always about perspective. Of course, the British Empire ran over that. Did you give her back the
economic? Did you give her the economic?
I see. So I'm still working through it again.
Oh, I thought you already finished.
I did finish it, but I needed to. That's why I went and read The Richest Man in Babylon again, because I needed to get I need to get my statement correct on the portion of debt slavery that I'm writing about. I'm just writing a little article.
Yeah.
Is it going to go up on a particular website that's about to launch soon? I
don't know. We'll see.
Can we get some of that? I'm saying
I gotta be on my V for Vendetta, so I don't know. I don't know if I'll do it. It might be somebody else.
Smithery Ave? Is that? Oh man, but
anyway, that's what I've been doing.
That's what's up.
Oh, I paid off my school loans.
Incredible.
In my mama name and my name.
Shout out to debt. Getting out of debt.
2 different accounts.
That's great.
Yeah, shout out to snowballing. I snowballed my payments, and then I was just really aggressive.
Now we're gonna pause right there, because for those of you who don't know what snowballing is, it is a tremendous financial tool that you can use. It doesn't require any special people or training. All you got to do is, once you pay off a bill, take that money that you were paying that bill with and compound it to the next one. That way you snowball and snowball. I was telling Avery a couple weeks ago, I remember the last payment I made on my student loans. My wife called me, and she was about to pay. She was about to I told you I mailed checks in, so I know you waiting on me last week. So she's about to mail a check in to the student loan. This is a few years ago, and she called me. She's like, "You know, this is the last payment, right?" I was like, "For real?" She's like, "Yeah, like the last payment." I was like, "No, don't do it yet. I want to be there. I want to be there when you mail that dress." She was like, "I'm going to the post office now," and I was like, so I understand that feeling when you just knock out debt. It's a tremendous feeling. It's a tremendous feeling to feel, to get that weight off your.
Straight up, you got to go Conor McGregor on your bills,
Yeah, you got to throw a hand truck through the windshield.
Absolutely.
And this is part of the
Fly
reason.
7 hours.
It would be great if there was a time machine to not get into that debt in the first place.
But some things happen before us, and a lot of things we have no control over, like today's topic. You like that? I'm a professional here. That was my rush segue. But no, there are a lot of things that take place before our time that unfortunately we are subject to, and one of those things being our wonderful faith, right? And so the Christian faith goes by so many names, right? There's a lot of people will say, "I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, Some people say I'm a son of God. A lot of
Follower of the way.
Follower of the way. You know, people love to use the terms, I believe in God, right? I believe in Jesus, but I just don't mess with church people. You know, just all of the above. We hear all of the above. And, you know, because we got to kind of lump all that in together. One of the mistakes that that believers make, Christians make, is we segment ourselves, right? So we'll say, I'm not like them. I'm not like them. But people who are atheists or agnostic, they'll be like, all of you cats are crazy. Like, I don't mess with none of y'all. It's Baptist, Methodist, whatever. You all are crazy. You know, and I believe that the enemy does the same thing. He's not trying to kill Baptists. He's trying to kill anybody who believes in Yeshua. So, but we are subject, you know, in the 21st century here, 2018, just like we were last century. We're subject to things that took place before us, right? And so one of the trends, you like that? Yeah, using fancy words like trend. One of the trends, it's not recent, but it's something that's been on my radar for a while that I wanted to chop it up about. And it's this trend in general that millennials are leaving churches, right? But in particular, people of color, those numbers kind of go up a little bit. And so what we have is a people group, generation, whatever you want to have it, are migrating away from quote unquote church, quote unquote organized religion. And, you know, when you say the term organized religion, that's kind of a large umbrella term that a lot of stuff can fall under. But we're just going to sort of hone in on, because that's what we do here. I haven't said it in a while. We talk about God, faith, the Bible, marriage, all that stuff. I haven't said that in a while. So we talk about all that stuff. Race, faith, all that.
Yeah, I remember that.
I was going back through some old episodes the other day, and I was like, I haven't said that in a while. So that's what we do here. But we have the migration of a lot of people away from it. So what we want to hone in on particularly today is people of color, right? People of African descent, particularly those people who exist in the Western context, migrating away from, whether you want to call it church, organized religion, what have you. It's not necessarily at the levels of that it should be alarming, but it is becoming a trend. And not just that they're leaving, but what they're going to, right? Because one of the things in which you see now, and obviously it's more prevalent because of the internet and social media, is that people have a growing affinity to what they like to call, quote unquote, traditional African religions, right? And it's kind of a mixture, so you can kind of be a little bit of syncretism in there, because it's kind of like an amalgamation of a lot of different stuff.
I mean, it was there. It's all in the Black Panther, you know? I mean, you have people who use.
You mean the film? The
Black Panther, yeah.
Not Huey Newton and.
Okay. I mean, there's that too, but in the Black Panther literally worshiping Bast or Bastet, and Bastet being a goddess, Egyptian goddess. That's a real thing that people actually worship. Mm-hmm. So there's the term Oya, right? And Oya is a goddess. Or mother goddess. You have Semiramis, Queen Semiramis. That's based out of Babylonia and Mesopotamia. So yeah, people are migrating to these things. But I just wanted to bring that up as far as the Black Panther goes, because it was all throughout the Black Panther.
And also, it looks like we're not just talking about people who go from one church to the next. You know,
no.
Basically, what a lot of us have experienced is starting off in one church and then getting a deeper knowledge of something in Scripture that our church doesn't address, and then going to another church that might be a little bit better in that area. So we're not talking about church hopping, even if it's church hopping over decades. We're talking about people leaving altogether and either going to a group that has beliefs that are inconsistent with what we would consider, I guess, basic Christianity, or at least Western Christianity, or just leaving altogether and choosing faiths from what we would consider our ancestral traditions.
And to be very specific, we're talking about people who either at one time went to church, considered themselves a believer, considered themselves a Christian, and are now no longer considering themselves that, or no longer doing those things. So it's a very specific trend that you see. We're not talking about somebody who didn't grow up a believer, you know, and so that they don't come from that particular faith tradition. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the trend of people who at one point that was how they classified themselves, and now they no longer, for whatever reason.
Well, now
there's
they-
a myriad of reasons,
Okay.
but they no longer do that.
Got it.
Well, now all three of us, the interesting part is that all three of us know people who are in these categories, and it is a trend in our circles. But are there writings, is there evidence, that there are people who are making this transition?
Oh yeah, there is some stats. Of course, we can look up a ton of stats, but I went to Pew Research, and 78% of Americans right now who would consider themselves, quote unquote, not identifying with a religious, group or whatever, they were raised, quote unquote, religious.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about people who don't come from any faith tradition. These are people who came from a particular faith tradition, who now are like, I'm good. And one of the, we can pinhole a lot of different, reasons why, but, obviously one of the big and specific, reasons why, and there were a couple articles that we're going to reference today, but that I don't agree with totally, but they sort of point to this trend. So people will say, hey, Western Christianity is, steeped in colonialism and capitalism, and
White
that's
man's
why,
religion.
And white supremacy.
and white supremacy.
White supremacy.
That's why I don't identify with it, right? So I'm leaving. So I'm leaving organized, quote unquote, organized religion. I'm leaving the church. I'm leaving the faith. And a lot of people will say, and I've heard this and I've read it different places, but these articles both actually highlighted it, that the election of 45 was kind of like that line in the sand, right? Like that line in the sand where it's like I was already kind of wrestling with some things.
But then I find out that the majority of white Christians actually voted for him. This is numerically correct.
Right.
And
It's
then
factual,
you're like,
yeah.
wait a second, I'm actually in a church where most people would vote for this man, and have contradictory views about what the role of a president is, based clearly on color or based clearly on political party, because they did not have some of the same criticisms of the previous president. There's a difference. The previous president was demonized, even though he was seemed to be a faithful husband and even declared that he was a Christian. Whereas this man is being embraced by a lot of people, or at least during his campaign was, even though his lifestyle was definitely not biblical. So I think what a lot of people are doing is they're saying, I was already questioning what's going on culturally in my churches, but now I realize that most people actually voted for this man who are, white Christians, and this is what I'm aligning myself with.
So some of the reasons that people noted in this Pew Research study, and we can put the link on the Facebook page, and we'll tweet out the link to the Pew Research study. So here are a couple of the reasons, and we want to start broad before we get too narrow. So we're starting very broad here. Some of the reasons, and these are direct quotes from some of the people who were polled in this research study. I see organized religious groups as more divisive than united. I think that more harm has been done in the name of religion than any other area. These are, pretty standard. This is standard operating procedure for people who don't want to believe, right? I no longer believe in organized religion. I don't attend services anymore.
Yeah.
I just believe religion is very personal with me and my creator. That's another one. That's another sort of lie and deception that we want to sort of dig into. I believe, here's another big one. I believe, and of course these people were anonymous, so there's no names associated with these quotes, but Pew is just quoting them. Because I think religion is not religion anymore, it's a business. It's all about money. That was another quote. Clergy sex abuse scandals is another one, and then some of the church's teachings on homosexuality. So those are some of the direct reasons why people in the Pew Research study would say they no longer identify with organized religion. Let me talk about Christianity here.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is that one, people say, I no longer. What was one of them? I no longer believe in the what?
I no longer believe in organized religion
Okay.
because I believe it's a very personal conversation with me and my creator.
what's happening there is that people know, they read the scriptures, or even just something encoded in their DNA, and they look up and they see how organized religion or the church institution is performing and it's acting, and they know that there's something that's not right, and it leaves emptiness in their heart and their soul. Scriptures have a parable about this, the parable of the sower.
Right.
What's so interesting is that the parable of the sower goes through that, where it talks about how there's a farmer or a sower who has seeds, and he sows the seeds on different kinds of ground. And so some people, they look and they see that there's something wrong with it, and they just say, okay, well, the hell with it. I'm good, and it's hurtful. And to deal with this, to get an answer for the unanswerable, and I'm traumatized, and so I'm just going to fall back. So that's you have people who do that. You have someone else who can be very intellectual, and they say, the Bible's been manipulated, and so that's an epistemological issue.
Yeah.
Where I don't trust this source of truth, and so what is so interesting about that is that people throw away and they discount the Bible, and yet so much of what it is that we experience right now directly comes from the scriptures. Perfect example, usury. I bring this up all the time, and
He just said it because it reminds him of his name, Avery Usury. Is that?
that's funny. I bring that up, usury, and that meaning loans with exorbitant interest. Usury is something that is practiced, that was prohibited in the scriptures for Hebrews to conduct among Hebrews, because it took advantage of people. And the scriptures talk about how a false weight is abomination to the Lord, right?
Yep.
It talks about that, right?
Yeah, false scales. Yeah,
False scales. And
Yeah.
false scales, what that means is that in trade, when you have a certain amount of precious metal that you use as a currency.
Don't put that brick under it.
Well, yeah. Use it as a currency, and then you have a money changer, and a money changer has a scale that makes it seem like that currency weighs less than what it actually does. So you need to put more on there. See, that's an abomination to the Lord. So when you discount the Bible, you discount these scriptures, you're discounting all of that stuff, which leaves you more and more vulnerable to be taken advantage of.
You're discounting the thou shalt nots, including the ones that you agree with. So
you're doing all
take
of
it
that,
or leave it.
and which only ends up proving the scripture to be valid even more, which is interesting. There were some other ones in there.
Yeah, so it's funny what you just said. It's like, why wouldn't I then just kill you, right? If we got into a disagreement, if we just going to discount the Bible, if we had a disagreement, what's stopping me from just robbing you and killing you if we get into a disagreement?
Well, certainly. See, now this is why this is why it seems like we're going all over the place, but all these things are associated.
Yeah. I'm just making it's
right.
an extreme example, but I'm just saying if people want to hold a certain level of morality, that morality has to be based in something.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
It can't be relative.
And people do kill other people.
Well, yeah.
They do kill other people. The problem is that people don't think that they can get away with it. Mm-hmm. The things in which that people can think they can get away with, they do. That's why people get killed in the womb, because people can get away with it. Ooh. That's why people get killed on death row, or people get killed in other societies that are abstracted.
Death Row, the record label? No,
yeah, Death Row, and Bad Boy. Yeah, because nobody cares. You can get away with it if you're puffy.
But
whoa, wait a second.
Just gonna edit that out.
Alrighty.
So you can get away with the killing if you are a country that needs to protect a particular commodity, and so you bring forth these pretexts that allow you to be able to bomb certain areas. And then when civilians die and children die, you can say, well, it was worth it because we protected this, that, or the third for the United States interest. So, people can get away with. I mean, people do commit those things when they think or know they can get away with it.
So let's go a little further into this trend.
But anyway,
Because I think what you're saying is exactly right. Because what has happened, one of the things that has happened, right? Because again, we're starting broad to sort of narrow down, because people have a myriad of reasons why they would leave a church or leave organized Christianity. But we want to sort of hone in now on people of color, right? So when you have a lot of Christians of African descent who live in America, they would cite things like colonialism, and Christianity was imposed upon
yes,
African slaves,
yes,
and things of that nature. And they would say,
yes,
oh, that because of slave masters, that's why the slaves chose Christianity, because it was imposed upon them by their slave owners. And then they would use that as a logical way of saying, that's why I no longer want to identify with that.
Which is interesting, because it doesn't get into the Bible, and it doesn't necessarily, at least at that stage, get into some problems that a person would have with doctrinal scripture and the basis by which this faith exists. It gets into the human injection into and the human use of this thing called Christianity or Bible believing, and then it will point the finger at what human beings have done, which is what human beings have always done. And so I think that once it gets to the point of questioning the actual integrity of the faith, I think that's something that we can talk about. But prior to that, I think when you align human beings with a faith that you once believed was of God, and you say that because humans are imperfect, I'm going to leave that faith, I think that there's a problem with that argumentation.
No, definitely, I agree.
Well, I can see the reasoning behind why somebody would do it. I would then further question, though, how much research has that person done? Because unfortunately, we have an education here in the United States, which I guess I'll label American History X. And the reason why I call it X, because X means unknown, and we have a history that's unknown, and so we follow this narrative of Christianity being equated with whiteness or colonial Christianity, without understanding that when we see those photos or those documentaries or those videos of missionaries going into Central Africa and you see these Caucasian missionaries carrying crosses and people burning their animistic or traditional African religion items. When we see all those things, and then we turn around, we think about slavery and how, the Bible was forced on us and all of that stuff. What we don't understand is that when we see the Caucasian in that position, forcing the scriptures or this particular, not even the scriptures, but this particular system of belief on you, what you're really seeing is a facsimile of something that comes from people of your overall lineage that you may not even know about. See, like, you're global, right? Like, you're global as a person of color, but specifically when you go back and read the book of Genesis, then you will see that the first people that the Lord dealt with were people of the sun, S-U-N, were people of the sun, were people who originated from what we now refer to as West Asia or the Middle East, or what now is targeted as Israel. But that's a modern map. You understand what I'm saying?
So it could just be Northeast Africa.
Absolutely, you got it. There's a modern map. There's a modern map where the lands were divided up. Like, I mean, how many of y'all have ever flown up over the continent of Africa and looked and saw it? Oh, well, yeah, it's actually shaped like how the maps draw it. Have y'all ever done that?
Well, I don't know that you could fly high enough to see those shape of the whole continent.
So,
and then of course there's the Pangea question and how South America might fit in there. But
right. Well, what I'm getting at is that these countries are modern lines. These countries are modern lines. There's a modern line that's drawn
and
between.
The Suez Canal is a modern construction as well, which separates Africa from Asia.
Yes. It didn't exist in ancient times. I got you.
Yes. There's a modern line that goes between what we now call Egypt and then what we now call Arabia. And that line did not exist in the scriptures. People of the sun, S-U-N, which we would now refer to as black in this country because of Blumenbach, we walked all up and down those lands, And so when we say like, oh, well, people from Africa, or people like that's why I call it American History X. Like there's a false narrative. There's a false narrative that we think that we're from one particular place when we could be from somewhere completely different.
Yeah.
People of the sun are aboriginal to pretty much every place in this world. Every place in this world.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So
and, one of the things, and that we, and for those of you all listening, we understand this is probably not going to be wrapped up in one episode, so this is going to be episodic. But we have to at least acknowledge the fact of people wanting to see or be able to identify themselves in what they believe. That's human nature.
That's fully understandable.
Yeah, that's fully.
Yes.
So when younger, because when you dig into the stats, you find that believers who are of African descent who live in Western contexts, Black American Christians, who are over 50, they still in very large numbers have no problem with organized Christianity, organized religion. But it's when you get to the younger, when you get to Gen X's and then the millennials, those numbers begin to drop exponentially.
Yeah, and yes. I mean, those people also, they come from a time pre-integration too. Mm-hmm. So they come from a time where the paradigm was completely different, right? And the unfortunate thing that happened with integration, and this gets into civil rights, it gets into cultural Marxism. We were having this conversation a little bit earlier, but the goal of cultural Marxism was to tear down any structure. That was the goal, tear down any Western structure. So yeah, there are going to be younger people that are not interested in tradition, whatever the tradition is.
And then the length of time that older generation members had been in the church would, make them even more devoted to what they've all. Even if they bump into a brick wall and find out that there's a major part of what they've been believing their entire lives that is not true, you spent your whole life devoted to that.
Well, absolutely,
that principle goes across everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, people stayed at their jobs longer. They stayed in their neighborhoods longer.
And specifically, specifically what you're talking about, Eva, could be referred to as the network effect. Mm-hmm. So, people stay because of the relationships, and it doesn't really matter what it is that's being spoke about. My relationships are here. So
social identity is extremely important. It's almost at the, if I had a hierarchy of needs, it would be at the base.
Two things. Social connection is one, and monetary value is two. If I own a church, like Carter G. Woodson talked about this, forget what you believe. A church, an actual church building, is an asset. That is an asset, and this is the conundrum, right? Because I understand. That the severity of issue with the institution of Christianity, where it comes from, and the Catholic Church and Constantine and all of that. There's a lot of problems, a whole lot of problems. And then at the same time, when you have a depressed people group who don't own anything, the one thing that they do own through and through is a church building. So whether or not what they're preaching is, and
it's hard for them to want to give up. That
because now that's the only thing you got popping in your, relatively popping.
I've heard that
in your community. That notion before. Then hey, right or wrong, we gonna ride this sucker because we're in America. It's capitalism, whatever. So those are the prickly situations that people find
prickly
themselves
is the
in.
word. Prickly is the word.
In the black church, I've actually heard that's why, particularly for older Christians, why that notion, what Avery just said, is true. Like why they would fight so ardently for position and fight so ardently for titles is because they couldn't get position and title anywhere else.
You were scrubbing a white woman's kitchen floor over and over again all week, but you're a deaconess on Sunday? I mean, you have
You
a
have to,
role,
yeah.
and this is not even about anybody having a sinister, desire for power. You are downtrodden all week, and now somebody says, "Hi, Deaconess
I'ma
Johnson.
elevate
Hi,
you, yeah.
Deaconess Jenkins," or you're the first lady, and you get to wear your hat to the side and sit in the front row. You are never front row for the whole week, and even if you are a stay at home and you have the means to be able, everybody who looks at you is scrubbing kitchen floors. So there's a reason. A lot of people talk against the black church and a lot of the traditions and the way that the ushers march in and all
But
of
you
the
have to
pomp and
understand the
circumstance.
context,
But there's
yeah.
a reason for that.
Yeah. No, that's good, Eve. That's good.
And specifically to the financial, the financial benefit of being associated, of owning it, of its land. All right, you got bank accounts associated with it. You can get a loan. You can build these bigger buildings that can, in stated purpose, benefit the community. I say in stated purpose, not an actual purpose. You can have apartment complexes. There all different kinds of things that people associate with the church, the building, that have absolutely nothing to do with the Bible. And so that's why they hold on to these things.
And it gives them identity. It makes them, like it gives them value, self-worth and self-value. So like I said, all of those things, everybody who who's listening, those are just a precursor. We're sort of laying down some foundation. So to say we understand why people would leave church, organized religion, but we also understand why people would hold so tightly to some of these traditions,
Why they would stay.
whether they're right or wrong. We're just saying I see it, I understand it, like I can process it, right? But you also have to be able to see and process why someone younger from another generation who has title, who sees value in other things that they do, right? They may own their own business. They may be CFO. They may be doing things, right? So they don't see the inherent need to fight and scrape for a title in a church, right? Or to have a quote unquote position in an organized church. They don't see the inherent need in that because during the week I may run my own business of 1,000 people, right? So when I come to church, I'm just coming to
For spiritual purposes.
For spiritual purposes,
Maybe I would say though, even more than that, people are bound into particular they have beliefs, or they have desires, they have wants that they feel alienated from that group and from that environment. And so that's why they don't go. And I think that is more than the CEOs, because about for one CEO that you just referenced, you got everybody else that's working for them. So I think that's infinitesimal. That amount of people getting validation from outside of the church, and so they don't go there. I think that mostly, speaking directly to the issue at hand, is that people are finding themselves when being quite frankly manipulated by the material in which that is coming across their timelines on social media and Twitter and the news.
You just want to take shots at social media. Is that,
No, I'm just saying, and the news where they feel as though when they go on Sunday that these issues aren't addressed. Right.
Yeah.
So and what are these issues? What are these issues? Well, these issues are issues of race and of racism, and primarily speaking on this particular topic. Like, that wasn't the issue for me when I left the church. The issue for me with the church goes back to, I didn't think that the church, the institution, was I did not think that it was an accurate reflection of what it is that the scriptures say it should be. And so I learned what I could from it, like when you go to school, and then I graduated. Yeah. And that's how I look at it. And to be trained. And so before a lot of people though, they look at it and they say, oh, well, these black bodies are in the street and there's black death and these churches aren't doing anything about it. So it's being irrelevant because they want to capitulate. So I'm going to leave. There's a lot of people that's like that.
Or they're saying that they see an entire structure built on white supremacy and on racism that they exist within. It doesn't mean every person believes that, but it's a structural, systemic thing. And they look at their church and they look at the system, and they don't see their church speaking against that system.
Well, I want to go a little bit specific to this particular issue.
Let's go.
I can remember, one of the brothers that I personally disciple. Remember, he was asking me. Now, this is a couple years ago when Homeboy started to really come on the scene. Umar, your boy Umar. This is probably about, I think it's like 2016. He emailed me a video clip. Right?
Umar emailed you a video clip?
No, not Umar.
Okay.
Umar Johnson. What was he? He's
the Big Papa, the Prince of Pan-Africanism.
Child psychologist out of Philadelphia.
Yeah, Mr. Prince of Pan-Africanism.
Yeah, calls himself the Prince of Pan-Africanism.
Now, he's been in a lot of things. He was in Hidden Colors, and he goes on the speaking tour, and he's in the Hotep community and all of that. We're going to go into that later. But this particular interaction with this brother, right? So he emails me probably like 2 years ago. He says, yo, a YouTube clip, because, of course, everybody gets their education on YouTube now. And so I had to come against that, too. But he sent this clip, said, hey, have you ever heard of this cat? And I was like, let me see what he's talking about. So I click on the link, and I say, it's Umar. Now, at that point, I had already seen Hidden Colors, and so I was aware of Umar. You know so I started to look up some stuff on the dude. But I understood where he was coming from, the guy who sent this to me. Okay. No, he is the guy. No, me and Umar don't talk, man.
Okay, all right. I mean, you using all these third persons.
I lost Umar's cell phone number, so
to follow. Okay.
He switched networks, and so I don't got his number no more.
I heard that.
Okay. But anyway, so the brother texted me and said, "Hey, man, and he emailed me, then I texted him back and said, hey, let's talk, and I said, listen, although the gentleman shares some facts, right? Facts are not always synonymous with truth. Mm-hmm. And, we sometimes can make that distinction in our mind. We'll say, oh, if someone shares some facts, it must automatically be true. And no, facts are facts, but facts are not always truth. And I said, but the reason that someone like an Umar would be able to gain a foothold on young black Christians is because the church, by and large, has chosen to be culturally irrelevant. And so we make room for people like Umar to come in. I mean, because listen, Umar has all the black preacher cadence. Like he knows the mannerisms. Like he knows like he even speaks in churches. I mean, when you go in and look, he does some of his lectures coming against the Christian faith. He'll do it in a church, which is crazy. That's another discussion. But the point I'm making is there is power, and we cannot deny this fact. And this is what Christians,
church and faith aren't the same thing.
And Christians like to do this. We like to put our head in the sand. And what we cannot deny. And there are two articles, and I'd at least encourage you to eat the meat and spit the bones out. There's an article on religiondispatches.org that talk about Christians of color rejecting colonial Christianity. And then there's another article on splinternews.com that talks about young black people trading in church for, traditional African religions. But there are just a couple quotes that I want to pull out of a couple of the articles. And I said, eat the meat, spit the bones out.
Yeah,
I said,
but there is meat.
But there is meat in there.
You have to teach people how to kill, because then they mess around, they eating kidneys and throwing away the muscle.
Well, here's some of the muscle that I want you to eat, and not the kidney. So, the first article, the lady makes a statement. She says, for some, there is power in seeing people who look like them represented as the originators of a tradition. For many minorities, ancestral traditions offer them a way to reconnect with a history that's been severed and erased. In interviews, I've heard how expanding their spiritual lens actually helps them see how Christianity actually does offer many of these things. A tradition founded by people of color, scriptural guidance for activism, and retethering them to the history despite their experiences with the colonized version, often stripped of these crucial elements. I think that there's some validity to that. Again, it's facts, it's not truth, but it's enough to be able to see and understand, okay, people want to be able to identify and see themselves in the thing in which they're practicing or the traditions in which they're believing.
I agree with that to an extent, because what that tends to do is teach people to lead by color. And there's a problem with that because not everybody that looks like you have your best interests at heart.
Oh, I agree.
And not
That's true.
everything that your people did in the past was to your benefit.
Right.
Obviously.
Well, selling us into slavery was one of them.
Yeah, well, for those that were sold into
Yeah,
slavery,
well,
because
yeah.
not every quote unquote black person was a slave. That's a lie. Because slave don't come from black people, that comes from white people. It's short for Slavic.
Eastern European. But go
Yes,
ahead.
white
But
people were slaves.
Yeah.
So, and black people were not all in slavery positions. There were black people that were in rulership too.
Oh yeah.
And then there are people that have your skin tone, skin complexion. Like I said, they are Aborigine or they're Aboriginal or Aborigine to every place in this world, including Europe, including the Caribbean, including everywhere. So anyway, this idea of, oh well,
You're saying we should look
I
at
need-
bloodline and not just melanin, or we should look at neither.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And we live in a particular dispensation.
Yeah.
But
right?
you can't reject it. I think what people are saying is, in most Western, expressions of Christianity, color has been completely rejected. And so when you tell people to reject something, it's human nature to go to the complete opposite extreme.
Okay, that's
I
fair.
agree with
Now,
what you're
let-
saying,
yeah,
but
and
if you say don't touch
what-
that, don't touch it, I'm
right.
gonna touch it.
Okay,
You know what I'm
so-
saying?
Okay, and I just want to be clear because, when we say this whole colonial thing, it gets back to the dispensation. We live in a particular dispensation, all right?
I mean, the people we're talking about are in the dispensation.
Right. I'm talking about we live under a particular empire. We live under a European empire. All right. European empire is not. It did not exist in time immemorial. Okay.
Yeah.
It didn't go all the way back to the beginning of time, and it won't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, don't let them tell it, but it won't exist. Right. It will be something else that will come.
It's actually relatively recent within the context of history.
Yes, it's right since the 1800s. It's since the 1800s that where they have been in their prime.
I'll
so
even
to
say
speak.
500 years, but even if we're talking half a millennia, that's still not long in the context of human history.
In their prime, in their prime, you have different kingdoms. You have and then you have empires, right? I've said this before, which are kingdoms comprised of kingdoms. That's an empire, right? And then you have your emperor kingdom, but we live under a particular kingdom right now, and it's a kingdom that is, if as far as color goes, it's a Caucasian kingdom, a Caucasian European kingdom or empire.
I agree.
Yeah,
But again, the
history
point that I'm
didn't
making,
start with them.
Yeah, history didn't
Yeah.
start with them, but the people that, if I'm taking a snapshot of where people are right in this
Yes,
moment, you have to take all that into consideration.
People that live
I can't-
under their empire.
Yeah, I can't cast all that
So
off.
even
and
if
say,
even if you're someone who says, I know that I was born into a book that's being written, and even if you studied all the history in the world so that you could understand your context, you're still living in a particular reality.
Exactly.
And you're still responding
and
accordingly.
I have to acknowledge that reality. I can't just say, oh, you're in
Yes.
that reality, so just, no, I'm saying, no, this is where you at. I understand if you're saying, yo, this is where I'm at. So because of that, I want to put all of that aside and go over here for a minute. Now, I'm not saying over here is correct, but I understand why you would just
That's what
wanna,
that article is saying, though.
Yeah, I don't, and that's why I said eat the meat, spit the bones. So I started, eat the meat, spit the bones out. Don't, everything in there is not all gravy because, they push the LGBT joint strong and they are
Well, it's written
anti-patriarchy,
by-
and I don't, some of those things I don't agree with either. So, but I can at least go through it and say, all right, I see where she's coming from. Okay. You see what I'm saying? So that was my whole point, because one of the other things that she noted in there, which is a people group that don't really get as much attention, and I know we can't speak from a personal perspective, but I've read books and I know a few believers who are indigenous to this continent, who are Native Americans, who I've heard this personally from talking to them as well as from reading, is they've experienced similar atrocities to African Americans, and sometimes in other cases worse. And this one of the ladies that she interviews in her article, Ana Yeltsin Velasco Sanchez. That's a long name. And I've heard this sentiment before, so I want to read this quote and then just expound upon. So she says, I don't even have access or even secondhand knowledge to what my traditions are, to what the traditions of my ancestors are. I have this really sad, diluted recognition that I am a woman of indigenous heritage, and I don't even know what tribe I belong to.
Wow.
I don't know what language they spoke before they were colonized. I've literally heard that from Native American believers who I personally have talked to.
Wow.
Because unlike African Americans who can at least go back to places where we may have or may not originated from, we can go to West Africa, see indigenous tribes. Many Native American peoples, their tribes were annihilated.
That's interesting because I thought it was the opposite. I thought it was us who focused on a full 11 million square mile continent and not knowing our specific heritage, whereas the Native Americans will be able to say, I'm Choctaw, I'm Cherokee, etc. So
but those
it's
are the
interesting.
larger tribes. There were hundreds of tribes that were annihilated that don't exist anymore.
Good point. And, so the reason they're saying they don't know, or these particular people don't know, is because those tribes don't exist.
Exactly.
And I do know that there are a few tribes where there are like one or two elderly people who are 90-year-old plus, and they're the only ones speaking their original language because the younger people don't necessarily have an interest in it.
And so this young lady, she's from Venezuela, but also, I mean, North and South
throughout
America.
the Americas.
Throughout the Americas, indigenous people existed there, but her particular tribe no longer exists. And so she was just like, yo,
That is deep.
Africa's a huge place. It's 11 million square miles, right? But we can physically go to Africa and see West Africans. We can say, all right, I don't know what tribe I'm in, but if I want to, I can go visit every tribe if I had the time and the resources, where someone like her, there's nobody who even exists from where she would have come from, right?
Wow.
So that's amazing. I think that it's amazing. So for somebody like her who would say, you know what, I'm good on Christianity. I'm good. Like I would.
Because those people who walked around with crosses and crosses were on their ships were the ones who came and annihilated my people. So why would I align myself with that faith?
Exactly. So again, these are just snapshots, everybody. For everybody's listening, we're going to go a little deeper into all these things, but it is a trend that we can't do the normal church thing, which is what Christians have done throughout history. If someone questions the faith or challenges something, we immediately demonize them or say, you know, you're in sin, or question
their salvation.
Question their salvation. All
Tell
these
them they're race baiting.
We have to, we have to go a little further to say there may be some other underlying factors that have deeply impacted this person to even get them to the place where they're like, man, I don't know. You know what I mean? Trauma happens. People go through trauma. We have to be able to at least be able to empathize, to say, okay, you know what? I don't agree with you, but I understand.
And they've recently found that trauma actually can, seep down into the DNA and pass on from generation to generation.
Generational trauma.
So this isn't just, oh, your great grandmother was a slave, get over yourself. It's not.
Well,
there's trauma
that
that's come
actually
through
was
on that
referenced
level.
in that article. What
Exactly.
you're talking about. I hear you, and I hear you. I hear what you're saying. You want to continue?
Oh no, I was just. I mean, because there's a book I read called "One Nation, Many Tribes" by a brother named Richard Twist. It's very powerful. He tells some of those similar. He's an indigenous American, Native American. He tells some similar stories like that.
Well, here's the thing. We watch sports, right?
We
sports.
don't. But our special guest, he hates sports.
Okay.
So no, I'm just kidding. We got a guest in here, everybody. This is number 2 live podcast.
Just to be sure, I'm stating that those perspectives. I'm not ascribing merit or demeriting those.
I'm being Jason Whitlock right now.
Okay.
So
you got to put on some weight, bro. Jason got me beat.
But what I'm saying is that those things happen. It's a tragedy. Okay. Those things were not necessarily like There is a huge spiritual component. Absolutely. Not necessarily biblical, but there's a huge spiritual component as to what led to that devastation.
Yep.
From that spiritual component, there's an economic component. There's an economic component where many of those, you brought it up, those conquistadors or those that conquering front line. All those people that came, and then they had an associate monk or missionary or clerical representation that had some kind of vestige that they said was because of Christ. All right, that's BS. Okay, like those people.
The idea is to give the Bible and take the land.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Those people. It goes back to what I brought up. Those people did not represent the Bible. Those people represented Greek mythology and pieces of the Bible, and they represented the different lands in Europe because they wanted to expand their territories because they were competing with one another. So that's why they came, and that's why they killed y'all. All right.
They represented pieces of the
just
Bible.
Killed us. No,
they represented the pieces of the Bible yanked out of context, and they had people who were supporting them financially, kings and others.
Absolutely.
So they were they were beholden to those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I say y'all. What I'm trying to get to the point is that look in sports.
So who are you mad? You should know who you're mad at, and whether they really did represent the Christianity that you're now rejecting.
Well, I think that can be that might be one part that can be salvaged for what I'm saying, but what I'm really saying is, and I'm speaking to the person who is upset about what you're saying, because people, they lose their lives. Like people go their whole lives stuck in that mire, right? Of I can't believe the white person did this to me, and what like in sports, right? Okay, like you can only have one winner. You're laughing, but people go to war. Like our societies, like our lands are drawn, borders are drawn because of war. Basically, I mean, you have land treaties and whatnot. But when it comes to empires, right? When kingdoms are absorbing kingdoms, there's a military aspect to that. Okay.
So are you telling the losers to get over themselves and admit, that their ancestors lost to the ancestors of the winners, and stop and stop fighting? You've been defeated.
Look, I'm not telling. I'm telling you. I'm spitting facts. It's up to you to see whether or not you want to swing at gnats for your whole life, or if you actually want to truly have a more fulfilled experience in this life. Like I'm just. It's up to you.
So it's more fulfilling to exist within the context that was imposed on you than to swing at gnats for the rest of your life.
Well, what I'm saying is that maybe that is not necessarily the choices. Maybe there's another choice.
Okay.
Right. Maybe there's another choice. See, it's spiritual, right? And that's why when the Lord says He's the way, the truth, and the life, y'all thought He was just playing around. Like I'm the way, truth, the life.
In other words, there is a way to live within this context, whether you're the victim.
You can be in it, but not of it.
No, I agree. And like we talked about last week, we can't grab at low hanging fruit.
Yes.
Like picking up. So
because then you're the victim again. So you're the victim of your ancestors' loss, and then you're the victim of grabbing it, grasping and swinging at gnats when you could rise above it and live according to what you're talking about.
You're going to be the victim of cultural Marxism. We'll go into that in another episode. But you will be the victim of a movement or an initiative that's designed to conquer the West from the inside. You see what I'm saying?
So let's
and it'll
come
take
around
you
third
with
base here. Let's come around third base, because one of the things that I do want to go into, next time we get together, hopefully will be about identity. Barbara Holmes, the president of the United Theological Seminary, she made a statement about some of the things that she saw by indigenous Africans. And she was like, this is not just an African American issue. And so a lot of people like to make this just an African American issue. She said, but in visiting indigenous African peoples who were believers, who were Christians, she was like, this is how strong the erasure of their belief systems and practices were. That she said it was intentional and that it was nearly complete. She said all over Africa she would go and she would find young African people dressed as Quakers from a bygone era, wearing formal Presbyterian robes. In the middle of the desert, they're singing songs like Amazing Grace, instead of singing songs in their own cultural context. And she said it was weird and sad, actually. And I thought that is something that we have not yet chosen to address, the elephant in the room. That's the big elephant in the room. And so this is what we want to, we want to leave this with you guys to think about. And it's something that can't be denied. There are a lot of good guys out here right now, because it's like, I think Avery said this before, it's cool to be a woke church. That's like cool and hip to say. But what it has not addressed yet is the point of identity, and we cannot deny the fact that modern day Christianity, and when I say modern day, I don't mean 2018. I'm talking about, you can go back the last couple of centuries.
Yeah.
This modern iteration of Christianity and its relationship with white European culture, right? So when you go into indigenous Africa and they're singing Amazing Grace in a Presbyterian robe.
And
now,
dressed like
nothing
pilgrims
wrong,
and Puritans.
and dressed like Quakers and Puritans. Now, there's nothing, listen, I'm not here to bash white culture.
Western
culture,
because
yeah.
that's not the only
Not the
representation
only.
of Christianity over the past
But
couple
for
hundred years.
people, like
Good
you
point.
said, in the American Empire.
in
people,
American,
yeah.
yes.
So for people in the
Yes.
American Empire,
Yes.
that is the Christianity that's forced upon them. Now, this goes really deep because I'm not here to bash white culture. One of my good friends is sitting behind us, and he's white. So I'm not here to bash white culture.
your
but
best
but if
friend
it's-
is white.
My best friend. I have some of my best friends are white. No, I'm just kidding. But if it's imposed upon people who are not who that's not their cultural context, that's where the problem comes in. Because like that was the problem with Christian hip hop. Like that's the problem. Christian hip hop
Oh,
doesn't.
he brought up
What was the problem?
I thought we was about to wrap this podcast
I'm just
up.
throwing it out there. I'm just throwing it out there.
What was the problem
The
with Christian
cultural
hip-hop?
aspect of Christian hip hop. In order for it to work, it had to become friendly to white church culture. And any Christian hip hop that wasn't friendly to the iteration of white church culture that we know wasn't really accepted. I'm just throwing it out there. So we have to address the elephant in the room, which is identity. And so we're going to get into that next week. You know, listen, guys.
Next podcast.
Next podcast might not be next week. Hopefully it'll be next week, but it might not be next week. Oh, it won't be next week because we'll be doing the thing.
Hey, my man, Extra P said, "Don't say the years."
Yeah. So it will be in 2018. I can say that. But we do want to get into this thing of identity because I think that that's very, very, very critical. So we thank you guys for rocking with us this week. We know it's been super heavy. I don't even have a This Week in the News to try to lighten things up and get a laugh in.
No levity.
No levity
No.
today.
Yeah, the NBA playoffs, man.
Yeah, NBA
oh
playoff.
man,
We could see you can't laugh at my
And,
Wizards right now.
LeBron and his crew walking in with the high waters, all that.
There we go. That's some levity. Just if you want some levity, think about Russell Westbrook's powder blue suit he wore a couple days ago.
Why does it have to be powder?
It was dude came in there with no shirt and a powder blue suit.
you
on.
seen the little photo on ESPN with his chest assist showing?
Yeah.
It was. I mean, what's
With that being said,
Wrong.
ladies and gentlemen,
The
so,
NBA. Now we have a bunch of dandies
Yeah.
walking around.
so there we go. So we thank
I
you
ain't
guys
even
for
gonna go
rocking
there.
with us. We
I ain't
will
even gonna go there.
We will continue this conversation next week and talk a little bit about identity. But we do thank you guys for rocking with us this week. For Avery and Eve, this is AJ saying peace.
Peace in the Middle East.
later?
I know it was heavy. We know. We're sorry.
Let's get started, I won't cheat you. Let me set apart who is my people. The ones who set in their heart to be believers. Press on to the mark to follow Jesus. When it gets hard, they be seeking the leaders. Fathers that help them heal when they are beaten, or help them see the meaning when they're grieving. Don't follow their feelings that'll be misleading. Yeah, they the ones that keeping it biblical. Keep it 100 when others saying it's fictional. A relational life, that is how it's scriptural. A stay in the light while cats be living typical. Integrity we chose cause folks is hypocritical. Religious midwit, man, that is how they picture you. Wishing you would go the way